You're listening to Searching for More, a podcast of the Diocese of Arlington. On this episode, hear Father David Dufresne, a parochial vicar at the Basilica of St. Mary in Alexandria, talk about maybe the most important issue we could discuss: love. What real love is in light of church teaching, and how to let it flourish.
The people who are closest to us sometimes are the people we find the most difficult to love, to will their good for their own sake, because sometimes we have very bad feelings toward them.
Today's host is Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer for the Catholic Diocese of Arlington. Let's jump right in.
Father, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Billy.
So I figure it's two bearded guys talking about love. Nothing weird about that, right?
Nothing weird about that at all, yeah.
I feel like the thumbnail for this video is going to be a little off-putting. They're like, that title and these two guys, I'm not sure this is...
Although the age we live in, yeah.
Yeah, right. So let's start. We're recording this on Valentine's Day, so obviously it'll be published afterward, but it's certainly a timely message, but also culturally we hear the word love thrown around a lot, and it's kind of nice to root ourselves and make sure that what we're saying is what we really mean to say. So if you would start us off just in the big picture, and how does the church maybe define or describe love?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to always start any conversation, just defining terms. And a classical definition is to will the good of the other for the other's sake. And we can certainly unpack, what that is. That first off, just to will the good means that it's ultimately a choice that impacts our will, our decision. It's not primarily a feeling.
Right.
And so that's, I think, just right off the bat, to will the good, to choose the good. And then the good, we have to have an understanding of what the good is. And then to place that on the good of the other. So it's not what I want, it's not a selfish thing, it's ultimately for the good of the other person and for their own sake.
Yeah.
And so it really takes the emphasis on off of yourself and what you want and what you're attracted to desiring their good just for their own benefit. So sometimes that will either come at a cost for you, or sometimes you're removing yourself from the equation because you're really focused on the good of the other.
Yeah, my wife and I teach conferences for the engaged. So if you get married in the diocese, you have to go to this one day conference and listen to folks like us talk about these different topics. And the definition we've used there is the free choice of another's good, and it's perfectly in line with what you're saying. So when we think about love, and people talk about love at first sight and those kinds of things, what do the emotions have to do with love? Because obviously if you love somebody, you do have like an affection for them, whether it's like your brother or your spouse, like there is an emotion that carries with that. How should we understand the emotion that goes with love when the definition of it doesn't really account for too much of that feeling development of it?
Yeah. Two things come to mind. One is the very first encyclical of Benedict XVI. I think he recognized that we as a culture still have a problem with love. And he kind of picked it apart and said, well, it impacts, the agape, the eros, the philios, and so it's a really beautiful reflection. So I'd encourage the listeners to go and check out Deus Caritas Est, God is love, just for a great little refresher, the beginning part of the encyclical. Because we use that one word, he points out many different ways.
Yeah.
Right? The way that we love God, the way that we love our family, the way romantic love of bacon and bourbon, right? The same word, many different levels. Right, so our feelings should be impacted, but sometimes our feelings are going to betray us.
Yeah.
That I'm called to love my parents, but I don't always have warm, fuzzy feelings, toward them. Especially depending on our background, our siblings, right? Our neighbor. We're called to love. Chesterton's great little quip is, Jesus commands us to love our neighbors and our enemies, often because they're the same people. the people who are closest to us sometimes are the people we find the most difficult to love, to will their good for their own sake, because sometimes we have very bad feelings toward them.
Yeah.
So we have to get above and beyond kind of where our feelings are leading us sometimes.
Does our definition of love or description of love imply a sense of commitment to the person? Because in married love, there is obviously a commitment. No one would question that. But when it's love of a friend or neighbor or those kinds, is there a commitment that goes with that, or is it just as long as we're in this dialogue, or in this relationship, I would want to support your good and to convey the true and those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think that's where we really need wisdom from the Holy Spirit to say, like, okay, am I willing their good for their own sake? Because I've seen plenty of situations and relationships where say if it's a mom of a family and they have teenagers or people in their 20s or adults, and they might desire their good, but they're so involved that it actually involves enabling bad behavior or getting them out of these situations where, like, no, sometimes desiring their good for their own sake involves discipline or involves allowing them to experience the consequence of poor decisions. And that's still love sometimes, but it doesn't always feel that way. It might feel better just to always bail them out,
Yeah.
but then they never learn. And because you're not really desiring their own good, you're just desiring that everything be, copacetic.
Yeah, everything can be peaceful. And
Right.
I think we confuse what kindness is too at times, and it's looking to that long-term good for the person is a part of that. I understand you have a poem, is that right? That's relevant
It's one
to
of
this?
my favorites, yeah. So we know in the extraordinary form calendar, which Hallmark apparently still follows, it's St. Valentine's Day.
Yeah, right.
So in honor of that, it's one of my favorite poems is "Roses are red, violets are odious. Happy memorial of St. Cyril and Methodius." Just a little homage to the ordinary form calendar
That's
today,
right,
and the
yeah.
two saints that we honor. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. How does love, so if love is the free choice of another's good, how does love then grow? Again, whether it's between friends or a married couple, whatever it is, how does love expand?
Yeah. As an early Christian, I mean, I would always remark, whether it was saints or priests, who would just point to the cross and be like, that's love. That's love incarnate. Like, God is love, but that's what it looks like. And so I think kind of a mark of whether or not we're expanding into authentic love is it self-sacrificial, right? Is it desiring their good, but also it should cost me something. And so that's where we can see, okay, it's not just a feeling. It's really something beautiful that involves me sacrificing part of my ego, part of my desires, but for them and for their good.
I remember our vocations director here asked me to speak at a vocations retreat for young men, and they have speakers come in to speak about the married life, speakers that come in and speak about the priesthood and so on. And he said, "Oh yeah, and at the end, just ask if they have any questions." I was like, "Whoa, that's a whole different thing. I could just give a speech, but now I'm gonna get questions from high school." And I think some middle school boys. So I said, who knows what kind of questions I'm going to get at when I'm talking about marriage and the married life. But I got a great question. And the question was, how do you know the difference between being infatuated with somebody and falling in love with somebody? And I said, oh, that is a good one. And luckily, I think I had an answer. So here's the answer, and you tell me if it's good. The difference was, before I met my wife, when I would meet someone, I would think about how that person might make me happy. Could I imagine myself living with this person forever, and so on? And it was typically about, did they kind of fit what I needed? And when I met my wife, I thought more about, do I fit what she needs? Am I going to be able to provide what will be good for her?
Brilliant.
And I started thinking more about, how can I serve her? And then it was like, I can't imagine not serving her. And so when I saw that kind of turn, and that my thinking turned on that, and that's that others-oriented definition of love, I said that's when I knew there's something different here, and that should be pursued. How was it?
Brilliant.
Was that good? All right.
Brilliant. Yeah. It reminds Archbishop Sheen, who's just like has a great way to explain everything. He has a great talk, The 3 Laws of Marriage. And he talked about the first stage kind of being that infatuation. But he says that these 3 laws can apply to anything that you kind of are attracted to or desire. If you want to learn an instrument, it's like, okay, you start practicing, you're so excited, and you bring the instrument home, but then you have to practice, and that's hard, and that's work. And so he says the second law is one of crisis, or just that difficulty, or overcoming some obstacle. And then you kind of reach some sort of harmony after that crisis. And he explained that in marriage too, and so getting past that infatuation, it's like, okay, now I'm concerned with with their good, and that hurts. That hurts my ego. That hurts my kind of selfishness. To get over that crisis, and then you kind of arrive at what God's ideal is for marriage or for love.
Are there fundamentals that are healthy, like fundamental principles that are healthy for any relationship? I think about friendships and what sustains a good friendship. Like what should I be doing or focused on? Because I think, especially as time goes on, you start wondering, like, am I really friends with that person? And it's like, not that I dislike them, but we kind of drifted apart maybe or whatever. And I think people like there's a commitment to it. I think there's, obviously you need to be checking in on each other. But are there like theological or just good psychological principles for maintaining healthy relationships?
Yeah, good shout out to Dr. John Cutterback. He does a lot of good work on friendship, and I know he has a lot of writings, and I think some recently republished books on true friendship, and he borrows a lot, obviously, from Aristotle, just talking about like different categories of friendship, and to recognize, sometimes we have friendships that are just seasonal.
Yeah.
Or college friends that kind of will just drift away, or and he borrows, that a great metaphor that a true friend takes 5 pounds of salt. And what Aristotle meant by that is that every meal you kind of take a shake of salt, and so you add up all those little dashes of salt until you get a 5-pound bag worth of sharing meals. So it's really that much investment in time and just sharing life with somebody, which is in large part kind of boring. Right, and so it's not always like you're not always going to these great exciting events with somebody else. It's just sharing kind of shoulder to shoulder life with somebody, sitting down, having face-to-face mealtime with them. And so if we do that over dash after dash after dash, eventually then we know, okay, like they're not self-interested, like they just want to share life with me, and that's how we begin to grow friendship.
Yeah.
So I think that's just a general principle of, it's not just for fun. We're not just coworkers. It's not a mutual use thing where I can help them here and they can help me. It's like, no, we're in it for life, and that's really only demonstrated through time.
Yeah. I'm sure, as a parish priest, you work with married couples, you work with youth. Are there any things that you notice are common impediments to people either growing in love or establishing love? Are there any common threads that you notice between whether young people are married, or maybe it's worth separate answers, but are there any things that you notice as common thread issues that people deal with when it comes to love?
Misplaced expectations. I think if I could have a magic wand, just change any one factor, it would be managing people's expectations. So whether or not they get these expectations from the culture, from a peer group, from watching movies or reading books that kind of just have this happily ever after. Once I find the right person, then I'll finally be happy.
Yeah.
So
that's a big one.
That's a big one.
A lot of people we talk in these conferences for the engaged about that, because you cannot expect this other person to fulfill you.
Right.
Like they're incapable of doing it. So then you become disappointed. That's the role that God serves in your life. You find your fulfillment there. Right. This person's a partner in that journey, though. Right. Obviously.
Yeah. No. Exactly. And even just the expectations of life should be easy, or that like once I find the right spouse, then like life will be easier. Hopefully it's more rewarding, more fulfilling, but oftentimes it's going to be harder by a lot of different metrics.
Yeah.
Or even just that the dating process should look a certain way. Just that anything worthwhile is going to be hard.
Yeah.
And so just managing expectations when it comes to that.
I'm thinking about again, going back to the definition of love. It's this choice of another's good is for their own good, as you put it. That's God's love for us as well, and that's challenging. And so when you're talking about life is not going to be easy, God's call for us isn't going to be easy. Neither is His love, because He knows what's true, He knows what's good for us, and He's going to challenge us to keep going. How do we manage the difficulty of that? Because there is a sense of God's there to console. He is the great consoler. He's the great healer. But He's also there to help us grow and to become better than we are now. We're not that great, right? So we're always like called to that next step, and that's hard. But that's love too. How do we kind of manage that spiritually to feel encouraged, but not also feel kind of worn out?
Yeah, I forget where I borrowed this line, and if I know the couple well enough, sometimes I'll use it at their wedding homily. Is that marriage is God's sneaky little way to crucify you.
You would have to know the couple. Yeah.
That's right.
They would have to know you more.
But this is true of priesthood. It's true of any vocation.
It's true, yeah.
Because just if we just remain bachelors, bachelorettes, like we kind of remain selfish, just in our own little world moments of just like pleasure and fun. But we don't have anybody to hold the mirror up to us.
Yeah.
Like you have to change this. You need to repent. You can do better. And that's a gift, right? It's not always fun to be on the receiving end of that. But we need that, and we should invite that. So, if God calls two people together in marriage, husbands and wife have that gift to be able to call each other on to holiness. In our priesthood, to have spiritual directors, to have spiritual mentors, to have spiritual brothers that can call us out. Right, that's good. Right, those are some of my best friends.
Yeah.
Right, the ones that can really take me to the mat. Like, I love them for that. And that's what we need to grow. Because if we just stay little individuals, just kind of passing through this world, we will tend to put up walls and not let people see our true self, which sometimes isn't very flattering.
Right.
But that's the grace of that vocation, to let somebody in there. Then also for couples to do that for each other, like to have couples groups, Teams of Our Lady, different apostolates, where different couples get together and share their struggles, at an appropriate level, to really be vulnerable in that sense. And also to know that, like, they're not abnormal if they struggle, if they have problems.
Yeah.
This is just part of life, but to not go through those struggles alone.
Yeah, that quiet struggling I've noticed with couples as we get closer to a couple, often you realize there's issues there, and they are surprised that other people have had issues like that as well. But that accountability is so key, both within friendships, obviously within marriage, and like I have a very close friend who made a huge mistake in his marriage and almost lost it over that. And when he was telling me, because it was all going to become public, what had happened, he was kind of talking himself into, like, there was no other choice. And it was the most uncomfortable thing I've ever had to do in my life, to say, that is absolute nonsense. I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, buddy, you got to stop saying that to yourself. It's not true. Yeah. And it took a couple years for him, but he came to me at some point and said, you were trying to be a real friend to me, because he pushed me away. And, I honestly kind of understood it. He was not at a place to receive that. But we're way better friends now.
Came back, yeah.
We're way better friends now. He knows I'm committed to his good, and he knows I'm willing to go where it's very uncomfortable. And I know he would do that for me. It was coincidental that I was in that position, but I know that he would do the same for me, and that helped us grow. And that also, I think, helped for him solidify that it was a mistake that he made, and that he has to work to improve the marriage and put in that time. And there was a lot of struggle there, and God bless his wife for sticking through it. But that challenge, that struggle, and working through it together, but that accountability is so key. That's why the single life is not really a vocation. It's a state moving you toward one. Talk a little bit, if you don't mind, just about the accountability of the priesthood, because we don't hear about that much, and people think of priests as single. It's like, no, they're not. There is this, through that brotherhood, there's accountability that's very different, I think, than most normal friendships would be. There's almost an obligation to offer that to each other.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly see the effects of a lack of accountability when priests kind of go off the reservation, sadly.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we're challenged every day to remember that like, we can spend a lot of our day just like being an individual priest helping people, but then who's helping us? Right? And then where are my brothers, but then where are my mentors, right? Where, like, do I check in with my spiritual director? Do I just hang out with friends that can call me to the mat? Like, so that's key. So all of our major relationships, right, are going to be those things that really sustain us, right? So primarily, I think of this when I get vested for Mass. The first thing I put on is an alb, right, to call to mind my baptism, because before I could be a father, I have to be a son, right? So to connect in with the Heavenly Father through my sonship, and then I'm a father to the people, but then a brother to my brother priests, and then also their little brother, their big brother sometimes. And then my spiritual mentors, to be a son to them. And so all these different aspects of our relationship are work. We have to invest in them. We have to keep up. And sometimes, so I have just on my calendar, auto repeat, like checking with my spiritual director, schedule those appointments. Yeah. Auto repeat, one of my days off a month, right? Hang out with my brothers. To reach out to them, to maybe bring somebody in new, so it's not just like a clique. Yeah. Who's maybe isolated, that kind of needs to be reached out to. Somebody maybe, going back to that great definition of love, what priests really annoy me? That maybe like I need to reach out to, because they could probably teach me a thing or two, or maybe that's just an opportunity for me to practice virtue.
Yeah, patience.
right. I don't do that all the time, and I don't do a very good job of it, but like it is a little reminder.
Yeah.
Of like, he's a priest of Jesus Christ forever.
What was the adjustment like for that when you're newly ordained and so you enter into this brotherhood? It's very different than when you're a seminarian, Yeah. What was that adjustment like? And again, that accountability being there, it's a form of love that you hadn't experienced before. What was the adjustment like for that?
I mean, it was maybe easy for me just because of my temperament. I mean, I'm an only child. I'm used to kind of being alone and maybe a little too much of the rugged individual kind of in my background, or residue, and that's not a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So kind of recognizing that, and then the diocese, did a good job, Father Scalia and the Bishop Laverty at the time of just having these monthly gatherings of the newly ordained priests, and that was kind of a newer initiative because they kind of recognized you go to a community of 300 guys, and then you're basically all alone all day,
right?
And where every minute of your day is planned in seminary, and now it's all on you. That's a big transition to make.
I would imagine. I know Bishop Burbage has similar kinds of things for newly ordained to keep them in community and relationship, and
so that's huge. That's really big. And then also saying what's around as far as who's already getting together and what can I get plugged into, or just like what brother priests are in my neighborhood that I can reach out to and just get together for a meal.
That's very good. I know tomes have been written on the topic of love, so I'm not going to act like this podcast has covered all the bases, but is there anything key that you feel like maybe I didn't ask about, or anything that you would feel like, boy, I really want to make sure that's conveyed, if nothing else?
On this, extraordinary forum memorial of St. Valentine's Day, just again for everybody to manage our expectations of what that is, because if you're at home on Valentine's Day, you could just feel like a big loser, or like a priest, or something. Well, obviously we don't have romantic interests, so there's just the hyper, not just sexualization, but hyper romance kind of expectations in our culture. But just to recognize, God is ultimately the source of all of our desire, and the fulfillment of our desire, and so it's just a good opportunity for all of us, whatever state in life, whatever vocation we're committed to recognize, God alone can fulfill us.
Yeah.
And no matter how beautiful or handsome, holy your spouse is, they're not good enough, and that's okay, right? And no matter how awesome our diocese is, Arlington, being a priest in Arlington isn't the end all be all. Only Jesus Christ and the Holy Trinity can fulfill that in me and any priest.
It's hard to keep our vision focused on that, right? Because there's so many distractions that can make you think that fulfillment is from it could be from things or from people or whatever it is, but it's not.
Yeah, amen.
Very good. Father, thank you so much for your time. You're very busy, but you carved out some time for us, and I'm so grateful for it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Billy.
You're listening to Searching for More. If you enjoyed this podcast, please write a review on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Also, make sure you follow the Diocese and the Arlington Catholic Herald on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And subscribe to our YouTube channels for regular videos that inspire, educate, and inform about the Catholic faith in our diocesan community.